All right, all right, all right. Hey ho, let's go. Hello, my legendary friends. So glad that you could join us today. We've got an incredible show for you. Overall, we're going to be talking about digital marketing and podcasting, and we may take a couple of chase some zebras down some rabbit holes, if you know what I mean. And we have an incredible guest for you who I'm going to tell you all about in a moment. My friend Stephen Woessner, who's a digital marketing and podcast guru. All right. Off the top, however, wanted to have a conversation with you a little bit about what's going on at Apple. And in particular, not just Apple, but Apple's kind of numbers elucidate something that is very important, I think, to focus on, which is the compounding power of a category king over time. And so, we talk about category design and category kings a lot in the context of being a startup and how you get your category strategy right and all that good shit. And but what we don't spend as much time talking about is if you're lucky enough to, as we call it, prosecute the magic triangle, that is to say, get product, company, and category right, and therefore position yourself to create, or if you will, design, and then ultimately dominate a new category. We don't spend a lot of time talking about it's kind of like in the movies, the movie ends with, and then they lived happily ever after. And so just wanted to shine a light on the compounding power of a category king. And if you're lucky enough to get that position, what happily ever after looks like, so to speak. And there was a story in the Sunday Times, Sunday, May 7th, 2017, written by Jeff Summer. And the headline of the story says, can the Apple cash machine keep on chugging? And so I wanted to pull out a couple pieces here for us to take a look at. Number one, of course, as of now, Apple is about a $776 billion market cap company. And the Times sort of says, is $1 trillion market cap really in the cards? But beyond market cap, there's more to it. Let me read you this piece. On Tuesday, the company provided fresh details of how great a cash machine it is. In just 3 months, after expenses and investments and payouts to shareholders, Apple's already colossal pile of cash and securities grew another 10.8 billion. So that was in 1 quarter. So let's just stop for a second. In 1 quarter, the company grew its cash position by almost $11 billion. Holy fuck. I mean, how many businesses in history are building $11 billion or almost $11 billion worth of cash a quarter? And that means that their cash position is reaching a nearly, quote, unfathomable 256.8. So let's call it 257 billion. The article goes on to say, in the scheme of things, how big is that? Consider that 256.8 billion is more than the value. So not more than the cash, the value, i.e. market cap, of every other American company except Microsoft, Alphabet, which of course is Google, Facebook, ExxonMobil, Johnson & Johnson, Berkshire Hathaway, and JP Morgan Chase. So let's just get that. Their cash is worth more than the value of every company except those ones. And the article goes on to say Apple has enough cash for an outright purchase of GE or Wells Fargo or AT&T. And there's speculation that Apple will make a major acquisition, potentially somebody like Netflix, Disney, Hulu, Tesla are, quote, on analysts' lists. So I just thought that was an incredible perspective on one of the most legendary category kings of all time, Apple, and what happily ever after looks like. And so there is no shame. I know sometimes I can be hard on Apple. There is absolutely no shame in milking the category for all it's worth, or putting it more nicely, maybe. They created these huge categories. They built these amazing technologies. And the world has beaten a path to their door. And so if you are lucky enough to do that, whether it's with your local small lawn mowing business, or whether it's with your big E-funded Silicon Valley, Sand Hill Road attempt to become the next Apple, if you get to the promised land, and get to be a category king, what there is to do is enjoy the fruits of your labor, because you won. You're in the Hall of Fame. The other thing, I've been out in the world a lot lately, more than usual. People who know me know I don't love to travel. I used to travel 300 to 400,000 miles a year, and frankly, I'm pretty happy not to get on a plane anymore. But of late, I've been out in the world and having a lot of conversations with people, and I sort of had an aha about category kings as well. Something that's not we didn't talk about in our book, but I think it's an important thing to think about. We talk a lot about categories work because of the way the human mind or human brain works. And one of the sort of things that's gotten clear to me, one of the things I've learned recently since we wrote Play Bigger, is if you talk to any kind of scientist or anybody who studies kind of human behavior and the human brain and the way humans have developed over time, one of the things I've heard recently that made a lot of sense was as human beings, we don't particularly like chaos. Because when there's chaos, there's uncertainty, and when there's uncertainty, it fires our fight or flight, and it creates an environment that generally human beings don't like. And so here's the aha. In markets where there's no clear category king, from the perspective of consumers or potential consumers in that category, that looks like chaos. And so if there's chaos, we don't know which decision to make. And we know that human beings want to simplify things and make less decisions, not more. So a big aha I've had is part of the reason category kings get such dominant positions. If you remember, 76% of all the value in tech categories goes to the category king. Um, is a big part. A big part of it is you and I as human beings don't like chaos. We like simple decisions. And when the king rules the kingdom, so to speak, she sets order in place. By the way, in my world, there's king is not part of a description of male or female. And so just like many women today call themselves chairman of the board, there are women who are category kings, so don't be confused. Anyway, the king rules the kingdom, and as such, there, if you will, there's peace in the category because the king makes sure there's order to what used to be chaos. And by definition, a lot of people use the word disruption around category design. Sometimes new categories create disruption, sometimes they don't. But regardless, when a new category emerges, it's because a problem has been evangelized and people are gravitating towards solving that problem. And in the beginning, there's multiple companies solving that problem, and there's sort of a battle for who's going to be the market leader. Other than the very kind of early adopter type folks in a market, a lot of people sit on the sidelines waiting for the king to emerge, establish order, and most importantly, make their brains happy by making it clear what choices they should make. And when that happens, you get that compounding power that Apple has. All right. The next thing I wanted to touch on that's completely in alignment with having Stephen on Legends and Losers today is what's going on in digital marketing and sort of talk a little bit about the downside. As you know, I'm a huge fan of digital marketing. Most analysts or whatever you want to call them put digital marketing spend at somewhere around 40% of marketing spend today. And I think a big driver of that at a high level is that digital is a lot more measurable and targetable than any other kind of marketing or advertising. And if you go back to when Google first became the category design pioneer of search and therefore search advertising, they were one of the companies at scale who were really able to tell you, okay, you spend this money and at some level of transparency and detail, here's what happened when you spend that money. So you buy an ad and we track what happened, and you guys all know that. And so that's the powerful part of digital marketing is it's a lot more measurable than any other marketing was in the past. However, as you know, today's solutions often turn into tomorrow's problems. And so the problem I think we have today is that no one can answer a simple question about digital marketing, which is what happened today? If I'm the chief marketing officer of your company and I'm spending money and I've got paid media and earned media and I'm trying to get a virality going and I'm working on multiple channels, multiple platforms all across the digital world. I'm doing direct email. I'm doing all these things. And of course, you got a website, all the things that I know you're doing. Wouldn't it be great to know, okay, so what happened today? How many people came to our website? Did they do anything? What did they do? All the stuff that we posted, whether we paid for it or we didn't, what happened? And even though there's a lot more transparency in the digital world than there ever was in the old marketing world, let me read you this. There's a website called marketingdive.com. And the headline on this story says, marketing's metrics problem is still a long way from being solved. And here's from the article, quote, despite recent cleanup efforts by the digital media supply chain, spurred by thought leaders like Procter & Gamble's chief brand officer, Mark Pritchard, marketers and platforms alike should hunker down for what's bound to be a slow, sometimes painful shift towards transparency and deeper insights rather than searching out a quick fix, blah, blah, blah. And, the interesting thing, I'm learning that there's a lot we're still flying blind on in the digital marketing world. And sort of the more data we have, the more we want, and the more level of precision that we're looking for. So where did my marketing run today? Who really saw it? And ultimately, what was the performance? So across in what they call an omni-channel world, that's getting tougher and tougher. And so I'm hoping there's going to be a lot more transparency coming from all the digital marketing platforms. For example, in the case of iTunes, if you're a podcaster like we are, Apple will not tell us how many subscribers we have. So you may not know that, but they won't. They'll tell us how many downloads we have, but they won't tell us how many subscribers they have. And they sure as fuck are not going to tell us who those subscribers are. And so while there's insight, often we're left wanting more to get more precision. And I think digital marketing will get more and more transparent and precision oriented, if you will, over time. And my hope, I know there's 1 billion technology companies in the digital marketing landscape, that as more category kings start to emerge, we'll see more in the analytics area. So keep watching. All right. Stephen Woessner is the founder and chief executive of digital marketing agency Predictive ROI, and he's the host of he's got a daily podcast, and it's he's one of the earlier pioneers, and a hugely popular show, particularly with entrepreneurs. And his show is called Onward Nation. As I mentioned, I was really lucky to be on with Stephen a little while ago. He's a pioneer in digital marketing and effectiveness and measurement. As a matter of fact, his business tries to steer you in the most measurable kind of high ROI areas, as the name of the company would suggest. He speaks, he teaches, and he's a best-selling author. First book's called The Small Business Owner's Handbook to Search Engine Optimization, and his second book is called Increase Online Sales Through Viral Social Networking. Stephen's been in Inc., Forbes, Entrepreneur, and the Washington Post, to name a few, and right now, he's on Legends and Losers. So, Stephen, I don't know who most of your clients are like, but, our intention wasn't to just sort of do a podcast to market and sell a book or something, right? So I know there are a lot of businesses that are doing podcasting today the way they were maybe blogging, 8 to 10 years, or maybe even as recently as 5 years ago. But at least for us, that's not quite the way we've thought about it. Right?
Well, and it's interesting, right? That podcasting has this kind of sticker on it that it's new.
Yeah.
When the reality is that ESPN was doing some podcasts back in 96, 97, I think, is when they first kind of rolled that out with Mike and Mike and Sports Center, and so they were one of the early adopters. But
I have some podcast trivia for you if you like.
Sure, go ahead.
So you might remember, Stephen, that we had 4 authors on the book Play Bigger. Mm-hmm. And one of them is a guy named Dave Peterson, who I've known and worked with for years. And he did a startup in the late 90s called Gimme Talk. And Gimme Talk was the pioneer of a new category that at the time they called Internet Talk Radio. And it was free internet talk radio for the masses. And their vision was that one day everybody's going to have an internet TV or an internet radio show. And ta-da, Gimme Talk. And, it's just one of those classic examples of Dave and his partners were absolutely fucking right. And they were way early. Yeah, and so Dave doesn't have a podcast today. I think maybe it stings a little.
Well, but isn't it interesting how the not necessarily the tech, but really more the consumer, the listener, has finally caught up to his vision.
Yeah.
And really the distribution channels, with it being embedded into cars, and it becomes native now in, Chevy and Ford, and the apps are just better. But even still, even with all the distribution advancements, it's still, I mean, there really is no good. I mean, iTunes is terrible for finding like good curated content. Unless you know specifically what you're looking for, it's
Yeah.
horrible to try and browse and find something good.
Well, and even, I hadn't thought much about it before we started Legends and Losers, but it's hard to find for some people to even fucking find podcasts on iTunes, right? And how to do a review and those kinds of things. Like, it's just, I don't know, you tell me, you've been at it way longer than I have, but it almost feels like Apple is neglecting iTunes, or certainly the podcast component of it.
Well, sure, because it's not a pay to play kind of thing like movies are, like music is. So it's not a profit center yet. And I have no idea. I don't have any secret knowledge as to what iTunes is doing, or what Apple is doing in a broader strategy. But it is, I mean, as far as, the destination of, I can't, I've never met anybody who said they just went into iTunes and they started, poking around to try to find the best marketing podcast or the best podcast on scaling your business or something like that. So it has to be, Chris or somebody, building their own audience. And so if you're a business owner and you're hinging your success on your ability to rank well within iTunes, that is not a marketing strategy. You need to be able to build your own tribe and your own community, your own nation of fans through social, through email, through a variety of other digital, whatevers, and then be able to drive them to iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, whatever, to be able to get your content. That's fine. But don't pin your hopes on success in iTunes and what they might do for you.
So how have you been so successful in building Onward Nation?
It's come through, gosh, I wish that there was a magic bullet, and we did well with iTunes when we launched it, and ranked, really well, and so forth. So so I'm not saying that you should ignore, some of the recipes of getting ratings and reviews and all of that. I mean, all of that is important, but the way that we really have been able to build our success over time is, in small incremental, increases. And it might be, 2% one month, it might be 5% the next month, and maybe you'll have a few months that are 20% and so forth. But it is typically a slow, steady increase over time. But it has been through, one, having exceptional guests on the show like yourself and others. It's being able to provide a great experience with your guest so they feel, welcome. They feel like their expertise was appreciated because it was, that they had an opportunity to add value to your community because they did. And then we tag our guests specifically within social media to make it easy for them to share with their audiences. And then by doing that, we have an opportunity to essentially piggyback on them into their audience, and that helps us grow organically. But there is no silver bullet. There is no magic bullet, or whatever metaphor you want to use. You have to create great stuff like you do, consistently like you do, and spread. This is a marathon. There is no shortcut in podcasting.
And how would you compare where we are with podcasting in the overall content, if you will, content marketing world today versus where we were maybe 10 years ago in blogging?
I think with respect to podcasting, we're certainly light years ahead than we were 10 years ago. As a comparison to blogging, I think we're, as it was maybe 10 years ago, I think we're ahead, but here's why I say that. Because as you and I were talking about this setup, if you will, for the interview, kind of the physical setup, we were talking about video. Well, okay, so right now we're doing an interview that you're doing multiple platforms with, right? Video, audio. You can then have it transcribed. It becomes a blog. You can then take that video, the entire video out to YouTube, as a whole, chunk. You can then splice it into little segments. You can turn that into kinetic typography. You can turn that into a video ad on
kinetic
Facebook.
Typography? Hold on. Some of us didn't spend much time in school. What the fuck's that?
It's a fancy way of taking somebody's audio and turning that into animated words and so forth, and flashing graphics.
I don't know. Do we need to turn legends and losers into a bunch of flashing shit that flies around the screen?
I'm not saying you need to. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. But the point is that with a blog, the blog is the blog, and it's great for SEO. Okay, awesome. Can you leverage that into different platforms? Yeah, but the audio/video content is so much more dynamic than it was. And then I think once distribution channels and the education of the consumer really catches up, I think it's going to be, I think we're just on the tip of the iceberg. I don't mean to sound like hyperbolic, but all the research points to, like I watched or reviewed an Edison research study, and we are still just on the tip of the spear. It's huge.
Yeah, I saw that study myself, of course. And the thing that blew me away the most, if I remember the number right, Stephen, I can pull it up if we want to check me, but I think it was only 21% of American adults had consumed a podcast in the last month. Is that, you're nodding your head?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And so, there's sort of two kinds of podcasts, at least at a high level. To me, there's a podcast that is primarily sharing its content for one motivation or another that's centered around that content, like a Legends and Losers or any kind of content coming from a media company or a university, let's say. And then there's content that is, a business is putting out there, that supports their thought leadership and their category design and ultimately their branding, and they want to be known as an expert in a certain area. Will drive a category and brand affinity. Is that the right way to think about, sort of, at least at a high level, the two big kind of podcasts out there?
Yeah, I think so. And then from a content perspective, yes, spot on. And then as a business owner, I want to think about, and I think it's really wrong to say this, but it illustrates essentially, how do I monetize my audience? And I don't think it's through selling ads and schlepping stuff. I think it's, being very strategic about who you have on the show. And
the selling ad stuff, if you take a step back from podcasting for a minute, I remember very well in the mid to late 90s when Seth Godin's book Permission Marketing came out.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a brilliant insight, I thought, and it made a shit ton of sense, and it really painted a path forward for marketing. Well, fucking hey, we couldn't be further away. We got more interruption marketing on the internet. I mean, I don't know Seth. The three of us share a hairdo, but that's about it. I met him once, in the 90s, and then, I was probably several scotches into it at the time. But anyway, all I know is we are so fucking far from it. You go to some company's website, particular media companies, you go to like a Business Insider or these kinds of companies. I went to Men's Health, and like 2/3 of the top is a fucking banner, and there's all this shit running along the bottom, and there's shit on the sides, and there's like this microscopic bit where you could read sort of 2 sentences, right? I mean, audiences are beginning to rebel against that. Isn't that one of the things driving interest in podcasts?
Absolutely. Forbes is awful at that too.
Oh, fuck. Well, you can't even go to Forbes, right? You go to Forbes and they shove this giant page in your face first. And the funny thing is, that takeover page, it's got like 4,000 pieces of content. It's got the quote of the day and all this other shit over here. You can't even believe you're at the company started by Malcolm fucking Forbes. Oh God, yeah.
Well, yeah, and like, going back to the principle that you just mentioned with Seth, I mean, one of the reasons why that book was so extremely popular and read by many, quoted by many, and why it made so much sense is because that's what consumers want. We don't want to be interrupted. We don't want to be poked and prodded. We don't want to feel like we just got monetized. We don't want to be hit over the head, with ads and retargeting and all of this other kind. I mean, we're hounded so much. And so that's why I think that content that is exceptional and doesn't feel overly commercialized really does attract traction or gets traction, I should say, with listeners, because it's like a safe environment. It's like a haven away from the clutter.
Well, if I think about Onward Nation, um, when you listen to Onward Nation, except for when you're doing the ad part of the show, right? But other than that, I wouldn't know that this that your show wasn't a content show coming from a media company. That is to say, it of course it's supportive of the areas of your expertise around digital marketing and SEO and podcasting and all the good shit. But you do not come across like you come across like a professional radio show host.
Thank you.
And is that the mistake that a lot of people make, a lot of companies make when they want to do a content-oriented podcast? They're too heavy on their own marketing and not enough on valuable content?
I think so. Now, I'm sure that you'll have many listeners, who will disagree with me, and that's okay too. But I think it has to come, coming back to Seth's, book, it has to come with the listener in mind first, your audience first, your fans first. And if they love what you do, from a content perspective, they'll ask you what it is that you do, professionally. Now that doesn't mean that also, but that strategy was kind of crafted when we launched the show because I was a little bit scared. I mean, just being honest, I was a little bit scared.
Well, I'll tell you what I was scared about. If you tell me what you were scared about.
But seriously, I thought, oh, geez, do I want predictive ROI in my core business? Do I want to be, promoting it in the show? And I was like, and I thought, you know what? No, I'm going to create a distance between Onward Nation and predictive ROI for that very reason. And you know what? For us, it worked. Now we've had some people say, oh, I had no idea that you did that. But the overwhelming majority of people, our listeners, were more pleased with the lesser commercialism than the reverse.
Yeah. Well, and plus you got that great voice.
As do you, my friend.
Well, thank you. I got a face for audio, that's for sure. But did people always tell you, Stephen, that you should be on the radio? Were you one of those guys?
No, and that's what's really funny, because as this has started, and I don't know, there's some moments where I feel like I'm kind of still going through puberty where it squeaks a little bit, but I've say to my wife, because
is that just when you get excited, or what? When does that happen? When somebody talks about pirates or Disney World? We're gonna get to Disney later.
Yeah, should I have painted my face for this interview?
Oh, absolutely.
Because you've seen the photo, Chris. So.
Yeah, no, I did. I saw it on your blog, and I was like, hey, wait a minute. Okay. He likes to paint his face and get all piratey.
So I don't know if it's because of all of the podcast interviews that I've actually more developed a radio voice, but it is kind of funny when I get that compliment, because I don't think I'm doing anything different, but I'm hearing it now more than I ever have.
Yeah. And what are you more well known for today, your business or your show?
That's a good question. I think it's probably a mix. I think amongst our guests, which is really the audience, who we really try to nurture and we really try to love on. When we think that we're
love on,
yeah. We think
do you try to rub on their leg, or?
It's a certain kind of oil. We haven't sent it to you yet. It's on its way. Anyway,
I love certain kinds of oils.
When we think of building this nation of true fans, when we think of that nation, we think of our guests, and what can we do to really add value in unique and special ways to our guests. I think are very familiar with, but it's to our job to make them very familiar with, predictive ROI, our core business, how we generate revenue.
Yeah.
And then our concentric circles, kind of our broader audience, probably not so much.
And so I'm pretty sure I know the sort of demographic that you're going after, but clarify for me, who would you say sort of the audience, the ideal audience for Onward Nation is?
They're typically, we call her Sally and her male counterpart Harry, because I like that movie When Harry Met Sally. It's one of my favorites.
I just saw him.
Did you really?
Yeah. So Billy Crystal is on tour right now. I think for most of the summer. And what's the name of the gal he's with? Because she's awesome. I'm going to look her up as we're talking. And he's sort of doing this I would call it a kind of a victory lap kind of a tour. He stands on, or he's on stage with this gal, and she sort of interviews him, and he tells stories throughout his life. And then there's clearly there's clearly sort of stand-up bits that are rehearsed. Okay, let's see. Here it is. And it's kind of fun. I mean, you certainly have to know him and be a fan. Now, why is her name not on here? Yeah. Now, speaking of not being able to get off a website, Ticketmaster won't let me off their fucking site.
We're quickly making a list of sites you should not visit.
Yeah. It's called Spend the Night with Billy Crystal.
That's cool.
And for fuck's sakes, what the fuck is her name? Yeah. And anyway, I don't know. It'll come to me as soon as we stop our conversation, I'm sure. But, the great thing about it, first of all, if there's a more affable person in our world, I'd like to know who it is. And, he just tells you all these great stories and, sells out the place. And he does a great job of kind of, would you like fries with that marketing? If you buy the super ding dong seats, and I went with my wife and my in-laws, or my outlaws, as the case may be. And, I don't know about you, but it's like, if you're going to go to something like that with your outlaws and you can swing it, like fucking A, right? Buy the tickets, right? So we bought the tickets, and in order to incite you to buy I forget how many rows, but close to the stage tickets, they give you all these Scooby snacks if you buy them, and photos of him and this and that. But you know what the best Scooby snack of all was?
What?
Actually, do I have it up here? He autographs a fucking baseball for you.
Really?
Yeah. So, and because there was 4 of us, we got 4 fucking autographed baseballs, proper Major League baseballs, not some piece of crap, wannabe from Billy. And so, if you get a chance to see him live, he's an American treasure, and the tour is a lot of fun. And if you can swing the tickets, you might get an autographed baseball.
Well,
make your outlaws happy as shit too.
He's such a classy guy. When he did, I don't know if it's appropriate to call it a eulogy. I'll just call it a eulogy for Muhammad Ali, and who I know was one of your heroes growing up. We talked about that during the Honor Nation interview, and I mean, what the class that Billy Crystal brought to that was just exceptional, just top notch.
Yeah, and he tells the story of how they met, and I won't tell everybody the whole story. You can find out. I'm sure it's available on the interwebs. But the net of it is, Ali is, I think he's getting an award or something like that, and the folks producing the show, or he's definitely at an event. I can't remember what it was, obviously, but the folks producing the show want a comedian to come on and do 3 to 5 minutes before either the band, or there's some spot where they just want a quick shot from a comedian, and the agent thinks, I forget that so and so comedian would be the right guy, and but it turns out he's not available. So he says, well, I got this kid, and he does 3 minutes of Cosell talking to Ali that's pretty funny, and because the other guy was in Peoria or whatever. That's how it all got started. And that was really, it turns out, the break that made his career. And the story he goes on to tell about what happens when he does that impersonation and the relationship that builds is really worth checking out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's remarkable. It's a great story. And so I love, When Harry Met Sally. It's one of my favorite movies.
So Sari and Hallie back. I maybe had to warn you. Any dialogue with me, Stephen, is going to involve some zebras and some rat holes, and there might be naked ladies dancing. There's a lot of things that can distract the undereducated and over whiskey soaked mind.
So we call it.
Sari and Hallie are the ideal listeners, or the listeners of Onward Nation. Tell me about Sari and Hallie.
Yeah, because they're typically running. So Harry or Sally are typically running businesses of $1 million to $20 million a year, and so they've done well. They're beyond the startup phase, right? But they know there's all kinds of opportunity out there, but they're frustrated because they don't know how to get it. And so they're looking for answers and steps and practical solutions. And what they find is this increasing amount, this tidal wave of information, but they're really craving knowledge and they're skeptical. They've been burned before. And so the guests are the ones that really connect with our audience are the Christopher Lochheads, the Jay Bears, the Kevin Harringtons, the people who are able to take.
If I could just interrupt you, like, what are the things that are on their minds? What are the, because as you know, I'm very passionate about entrepreneurs, and both Big E, the ones we have in Silicon Valley who write a new, cardboard dingulator and raise $200 million and try to become the next Mark Zuckerberg, and the small E, the guys who started off certainly like I did, where you have a dream, the yellow pages at the time, and a phone, and you just start swinging for it. And so if you think about those, if you will, smaller E entrepreneurs who are more of your audience, what are the things that they're really focused on right now? Can you give us some of the key themes?
Yeah, I think there's four, and these aren't rocket science, but they tend to keep small business owners paralyzed, and that's cash. How do I get more of it? How do I not squander the little bit that I do have? Marketing.
You learn very early on in your entrepreneurial career that when you go to Trader Joe's and you want 2 bags of groceries, that your good looks is probably not going to get it done, right?
Typically not good currency.
You need some cash, right?
You need the legal tender. Yeah.
And when you say cash, do you mean the whole thing? Do you mean like raising cash? Do you mean financing the business through debt, and obviously cash flow management? And, when you say cash, what does cash mean?
Yeah, I think it's certainly raising cash is great, but most small business owners aren't in the raising cash mode unless we're talking about friends and family, early seed rounds, right? But
in-laws are always good for raising cash too.
Sure, and anywhere that you can possibly get it is good, and then being able to make next week's payroll, be able to pay the taxes, the payroll taxes, and so forth, and then just being able to squeak out a profit month to month. For many business owners, the vast majority of business owners, there are 28 million business owners in this country. 24 million of them are solopreneurs. 24 million have not figured out how to add one employee.
Slow down for the how many, what?
28 million small business owners.
And what's the definition of small business in this context, Stephen?
Well, okay, so great question, because the SBA would define it much different than you and I. But the SBA is 500 or less employees. 500
or less employees. Yeah.
Right.
So they say there's 28 million of those.
28 million, right? Small businesses.
500 or less. Yeah.
Yep. 24 million of those 28 million are solopreneurs. So there's essentially one employee, and that's typically the business owner.
So you're saying that of the 28 million companies that are classified in the U.S. as small businesses, only 4 of them have more than one employee? Only
Correct.
4 million of them, if I did my math right?
Yep. And here's what's really interesting about those statistics.
That's a fucking stunning statistic.
It is.
That of all companies under 500 employees, there are 28, and of those, the ones that have more than one employee are only 4. So with no disrespect to solopreneurs, a solopreneur is very different than a company.
Yep.
Holy fuck. 4 million true small businesses? How can that be true?
Yeah. And those of the 28 million, that represents 54% of all jobs and 55% of, let me make sure I get that. The 55%, is that all payroll? I'll send you the links when we finish.
Because it is this, Stephen?
It's the SBA.
It is, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So I'll send you the links, and
that
then
would be great.
Yep, and then you can share that with your audience.
Idea. Yeah, that's a stunning.
So think about it from like an economic stimulus perspective, right? That of those 24 million solopreneurs, now many of them are always going to be solopreneurs, and there's nothing the matter with that. lifestyle businesses, whatever. So I'm not passing judgment. Please don't misunderstand. But if we could get a large chunk to hire one person, I mean, think about the millions of jobs that are created in this country. Business owners today have the ability to be their own economic stimulus.
Yeah. What I really wonder about is, of those 24 million, how many of them want to be bigger businesses, and how many of them are, what in the olden days we would just call, freelancers.
Well,
Right.
great
And now
question.
there's a new term called the gig economy. And there's a lot of people who make that choice. When I first moved, I live in a town called Santa Cruz, California. And we're a couple blocks from the Pacific Ocean, and it's a classic California beach town. And when I first moved here, you go surfing here on a Wednesday afternoon, and you'll be in the water, and the surf will be okay to average kind of surf, and then a couple of good sets will come through, and 15 minutes later 20 folks paddle out, and you go, what the fuck, there's this whole universe of people who, like, what are you guys doing, man? Like, what is it that you do that you can be sitting there watching a webcam of, my home break, which is probably their home break too. Well, it must be their home break too. Anyway, what I've learned, particularly living in a town like this, is there are thousands of people in and around Santa Cruz who architect their life around doing things like surfing that don't include working. And so by definition, they have to be sort of freelancers, solopreneurs in the gig economy, et cetera, because when a good set comes rolling through, we're waxing up. So I guess I would love to be able to know of those 24 million, how many of them are like that, and how many of them are actually trying to build something beyond themselves and for some reason or another are not able to. Do you have any spider sense of that?
No, and unfortunately the data set isn't sliced that way. And wouldn't that be really meaningful to be able to get to that? Because then you'd really know who would be the best to invest into, right? Where the data set does go, although this doesn't directly answer your question, or at least fully, but it kind of hints to it, is that 43% of the 28 million site, is it of the 28 million? No, it's of the 24 million, I believe. I'll send you the data set because I don't want your listeners to get confused, and I think I'm confusing them. But 43% or 12 million of the business owners cite growing revenue as being their top challenge over the next 12 months. And so theoretically, they're wanting to grow their business. Doesn't necessarily mean that they want to add employees, obviously. But
it is an indicator, though. That is
sure.
And so obviously your big expertise is around predictable methods of doing marketing to produce ever increasing returns. And so what are the things about marketing today, particularly digital marketing, but anywhere that your wide-ranging brain wants to take me, what are the things in marketing today that you think entrepreneurs and business owners need to know that maybe they don't?
I think that one maybe misconception or myth is that oftentimes it feels like mystic dark magic voodoo, and that it's a bit more complicated than really what it is. And that if I don't understand all things digital, and if I don't develop mastery across all of it, then I shouldn't even bother getting started.
Well, I'll tell you, Colin and I spent about an hour today fucking hooking up Hootsuite to fucking 3 Instagram accounts. And you need a fucking rocket surgery degree to do that shit. Holy cow, they make that hard. Wow. Do you know that when you fire something?
Thanks for reinforcing the myth there, Chris.
When you fire something into Hootsuite and you want it to go on Instagram, it's got to show up on somebody's fucking phone for approval before it'll go up. What the fuck? Anyway, I digress.
But also
some of this shit is complicated.
But some business owners, so you're a bit of an anomaly, meaning that multiple platforms are relevant for you. You're serving your audience on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and so forth, right? So, that makes sense for you to do that.
Have a choice anymore, Stephen? I mean,
sure you do. Absolutely. Yeah.
Don't you have to try to, like, certainly for a big brand, you got to be on all the big digital channels, right?
Of course, but that's not Harry and Sally, right?
Right.
And that's not
And
the.
so where do Hallie and Sally,
Harry and Sally?
No, Hallie's her new lesbian lover, I think. No, I don't know. I haven't even had anything to drink or anything yet today. But what are the right platforms for smaller businesses?
Well, it depends a little bit on what their business is, what their business model is, and in my area of expertise is really in the B2B professional services space. So let's say that one of your listeners might be the owner of an agency. They might like an ad agency or a marketing agency. Maybe they're a PR firm. Maybe they're a recruiting firm. Maybe they're a CPA. Maybe they're an attorney, or whatever a professional services.
We got
right.
realtors too, and people
Sure.
in real estate, and then of course we have a lot of people in the Silicon Valley ecosystem in one way or another. But let's say a smaller services firm. How should they think about digital marketing today?
So of course, Facebook's the easy answer, right? That it's got the biggest audience, you could do the most with it, and so forth. And then Instagram certainly runs parallel if they have a business model that's driven by visual. Not everybody does. So if you're a tax attorney or you're, an HR consultant.
Want to do like Instagram stories of you doing somebody's tax return?
Sure. And we could maybe split the screen and have Gary Vee here, and Gary would say, oh, you should absolutely be on Instagram. You should be doing stories. You should be doing that. But, the reality is that, the typical small business owner has a finite amount of time, and because they're concerned with cash and marketing and scaling and finding the next one right person, the reality is they don't have the time to be able to do all that stuff. Right. So if they focus on building a solid company page that they can then, invest in, and that they could use for, Facebook retargeting at some point, or they can use it to place ads in order to build their list at some point. Great, when budget allows. So building their platform on Facebook, building an audience on Facebook makes a lot of sense. And then if they're in the professional services space, they have to be good on LinkedIn. In fact, I am so bullish on LinkedIn, and I know that might sound a little bit silly, but they should absolutely master LinkedIn. I'd even put it above Facebook.
Wow. Anytime I'm on LinkedIn, my wife says to me, what are you doing on LinkedIn? Nobody's on LinkedIn.
Only 476 million people who truly want to be there. The average CEO on LinkedIn has 933 connections. I know that 933 might not sound like a lot, but you can't get to 933 without intention. The average, household income of a LinkedIn member is $75,000. Now, I know in the Valley, $75,000 is a drop in the bucket. But when we think of the fact that
we don't live in rest of world, we live in this fantasy land.
Right.
Yeah.
And
so what should people be thinking about for their LinkedIn marketing, both for them as an individual and as a company?
So, they as an individual, they want to have a great profile. Now, obviously that sounds, well, duh. Of course they want to have a great profile, but they want to have a photo that truly reflects them as, their own style as a person, as a business owner, as a leader, whether that's more casual or more, formal, whatever that might be. And then have a professional summary that actually adds value to the reader, right? That it's not a...
Now, I have a question for you about that. The vast majority of the ones that I see are written in the third person, right? And when I read them in the third person, and if yours is in the third person, I apologize.
No, it's not. It's terrible.
I just think, well, we all know you fucking wrote it.
Right.
You wrote it. And even if you paid somebody to write it for you, you fucking saw it before it went on. So you basically fucking wrote it, even if you didn't technically write it. And so it's like, well, John P. Public is like, hey, John, fucking A. So I guess there's a question in there, Stephen, which is, should we keep writing our LinkedIn profiles in the third person, or can we call a spade and begin to say, hi, my name's Stephen and welcome to my LinkedIn page, or whatever the fuck that we should say off the top?
Yeah, I think you sufficiently answered that one.
I did. Okay. But people don't do it, right? They go to this third person thing.
Right. And it's dumb. I mean, as you just, railed against that, it's dumb because most people feel the exact same way that you just described. When you read something stupid like that, it's overly formal.
Yeah.
So have a deep professional summary that adds value to the reader, that sounds like you're an actual human, not some third person robot, and then take advantage of the content distribution tools that LinkedIn is now making available, where you can post audio, you can post video, you can post case studies, you can be active using LinkedIn as a blogging platform, have a deep experience section, have your volunteer organizations listed, where you went to educate or where you went to school and so forth, because all of that creates rapport and connecting possibilities. So you need to have a great profile. It can't suck. Think of it as your landing page within LinkedIn is really freaking important.
And, people who want to use LinkedIn as a marketing platform, Stephen, what should they be doing around, blogging and posting and that kind of stuff, sharing content of one sort or another?
Yeah. So, I mean, getting into a weekly rhythm of writing one solid article a week and posting that through, LinkedIn's Pulse function or network is really smart.
I mean, you're prolific on LinkedIn.
Well, it's because,
and the other thing I love about what you write, you're sorry to interrupt you, but you'll take somebody on a magical mystery tour, right? I mean, you'll say, hey, we're here, and then now we're talking about Disneyland, and now we're over here, and like you're not afraid to okay, strap your ass in. We're going to go for a ride here, right?
I think I'm a big believer in that long form content. If it's good, it's great, and people will actually read it. And you know what? If you suck in 5 minutes, people will turn you off. And I think I did hear Gary Vaynerchuk say this once, that when episode 8 for Star Wars comes out, and if it's 6 hours long, people are going to buy 2 buckets of popcorn and think this is freaking awesome that I'm going to get 6 hours of content for the price of 3. But if it sucks in the first 15 minutes, people aren't going to stay. Yeah. So I think if you write long form and it's good, then, I think people will read it, and that's your style.
Even in this Twitter world, I mean, 140 characters, and
because I'm a big believer in that you should be you, and I'm not going to try to be, you, Chris, because your style is your style. What your gifts and blessings and what you're awesome at isn't my same skill set, right? So I like to write, and I tend to write long form. And if that bothers somebody within my community, well, there's other options, other people that they can learn from. But I'm not going to try to be different than somebody else. Def Leppard tried to do that, in the 90s, and nobody showed up anymore until they got back to their original sound.
Oh, was it? I don't remember this. Was it like in Spinal Tap where they started to do their freeform jazz experimental shit? What what did Def Leppard do? I gotta ask.
Well, they struggled, right? I mean, they were obviously one of the dominant hair bands in the late 80s.
No, I remember who they are,
right?
But did they bring out violins and shit, or what did they?
No, they tried to transition into the 90s sound, which was more grunge, they
wanted to sound like Nirvana and Pearl Jam.
Right. And that didn't work, right? I mean, that's not who they were. I mean, obviously they needed to sell albums and this and that, but their audience rejected them and they lost their community. Whereas you look at bands like Kiss, and sure, they took their makeup off, but their sound in the early 90s got a little bit different. But I mean, look at them now. I mean, they have a smaller community than like a Van Halen or a Bon Jovi, but they've really stuck to their sound and they've got a very loyal following. So if my longer
Detroit
form
is still Detroit Rock City, isn't it?
It is. My wife teases me because I'm kind of a big Kiss fan, but I mean, I like their stuff. So I think you should be consistent with who you are.
Somebody did tell you, right? The music is horrible. You do know that, right?
What? 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 Oh,
I'm a Kiss fan, and when I was a kid, I was in the Kiss Army. But like, it's horrible.
no, come on. I have a bit of an eclectic style in
All right,
music. I
well,
like Kiss, and I might listen to some Jerry Reed in the rotation. So anyway.
yeah, well,
So, but back to
God
LinkedIn,
bless Kiss.
whatever your style is, if it's short form, long form, whatever the case may be, just be consistent with who you are as a business owner, and just be
And
consistent in
can you
writing
be
content.
successful in business today if you're not in the, for lack of a better word, digital content business in one way or another?
No, I mean, sure, if like small businesses that are serving a local community, of course, but they're service businesses and that type of
But
stuff,
even
right?
if I'm a local coffee shop or a baker or that kind of thing,
I think you'll find just as many, examples and stories of business owners who are small in those same situations that have grabbed hold of content marketing and have figured out a way to add value to their local communities, but then have also found ways to build a brand outside of their local community. And maybe that's led to, something else in, a different revenue stream that they never would have thought of had they not gone down that path.
yeah, yeah.
But if you're in the B2B space and you're not using Sales Navigator within LinkedIn, if you're not using their lead builder, if you're not using that to build your list and integrating that into Salesforce or HubSpot, and if that's not triggering campaigns, or you're exporting Excel sheets and adding that into Infusionsoft, if you're not using new tools like Lead IQ that bolt onto Sales Navigator so you can build lists in the tens of thousands, using verified email addresses. If you're in the B2B professional services space, you're not using LinkedIn, it's a huge missed opportunity.
Interesting. Yeah, I think for a lot of small business owners, this stuff is like trying to fly to space. I mean, like I talked about, you try to Hootsuite and Instagram up and tell me how you feel.
Right.
And all of us, wherever we are in the sort of food chain, whether you're a chief executive or a solopreneur, it's interesting. There's sort of no choice but to become digitally savvy.
Yeah, because you can choose to ignore it, but when I sat down and interviewed Avinash Kaushik, who's the digital marketing evangelist at Google, and he and I were having a similar conversation when I was out in the Valley and at Googleplex, and I said to him, Avinash, what would you tell the business owner, the CEO, who didn't want to learn this stuff? And he goes, look, I get the fact that him or her doesn't need to pull the levers or turn the knobs and that kind of stuff. But if they don't understand it, my question to them is, do you want to be rich or do you want to be poor? Yes, you can delegate it to a marketing team, but if you don't understand the vital metrics, if you don't understand the reason behind it, if you don't understand the relationships and how to build them, take them deeper, how to start them offline and take them deeper online, you're not going to be in business. That you'll be the guy with 4,000 horses who all of a sudden Henry Ford is selling cars and you're done.
Yep. And it certainly can be a huge differentiator for small businesses, because if you're digitally savvy and your legacy competitors are not, the speed with which you can interact with your customers and do business and drive revenue and do all the good shit is materially different. Yeah.
Right.
And then, do you think every business should have a podcast?
No.
So how do you think a business should think about, should I or shouldn't I get into podcasting?
I think if the business is run by somebody who I'll consider to be, a thought leader. So let's call that that business owner or chief executive a thought leader. And that person, it matters when that person is out in the industry and building an audience, whether they're speaking or writing or, whatever that contribution to thought leadership is. If that thought leadership ties back into the business's overall marketing strategy, customers appreciate it. Customers are more likely to be attracted to that person. And so then that's part of biz dev. That person should have a podcast. If they're, a consumer packaged goods, company. Should they have a podcast? Nah, I don't think so. If they're a local restaurant, should they have a podcast? Probably not. Should they maybe have a local radio show? Yeah, maybe. But probably
But
not
if I'm going to
have.
have a radio show, I would just put it on the internet too.
Well,
Right?
I mean, think about it. It's like, I come from a long line of, entrepreneurs in the restaurant business, right? And so my aunts and uncles and my mom, we ran restaurants serving a very local community. Does it make sense for a restaurateur in North Canton, Ohio to have a podcast? No. Does it make sense for that person to have, that business owner to have a presence on maybe a local radio station that is dominant in a particular age demographic? Sure. Being consistent with your content makes sense. Does this strategy work for every single business owner? No. Just like my uncle who owns that diner shouldn't be on LinkedIn. It makes no sense.
And if I'm someone who is a small business owner and I'm thinking maybe I do want to do a podcast, how should I think about it?
I think first you have to get your content strategy right. That's way before monetization. It's way before, and it's certainly way before.
So what does it mean to get your content strategy right?
Yeah, just like when you thought of Legends and Losers, how that ties into your book, how that ties into your overall career path, how that ties into your personality.
I don't have a career path anymore. My career path is over.
Okay. Well, most people will give their front eye teeth to be the successful 3-time CMO of public companies.
Well, thank you. It's very sweet of you to say.
So, but my point is that,
I understand, yeah.
Yeah. So, but most business owners think, oh, I'm going to buy this microphone. I'm going to go spend $150 out of Amazon and I'm going to buy this thing, or I saw an ad for this new carbidingulator and I'm going to buy that and I'm going to set up a studio and I'm going to start yakking into the microphone and record it. And people are going to care. No, they're not. It doesn't matter how short or long it's going to be.
What's that great quote from Howard Stern where he says, sure, put a bunch of audio on your website that nobody goes to.
Right. So you need a content strategy. You need to have a purpose for why you're putting that out into the universe.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that's where, in my opinion, most business owners get it wrong because they don't understand their avatar and they don't understand how they're going to add value and how both of those tie into their content strategy. They think it's buy your microphone, turn it on, throw it out to iTunes, and all of a sudden I'm going to be really busy. No. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. 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 It makes sense. And, just given how many there are and all that stuff. I mean, what's the average download per podcast? Do you know?
I think it's, I think Rob Walsh at Libsyn told me that it's 175. It's less than 300. If you hit 300 an episode, yeah. If you're hitting, in those 3 triple digits or whatever the right term is, you're like in the upper 95% of or the upper 5%, I think is the right way to say it in podcasts.
Yeah. So you got to make sure you're delivering something that's fucking awesome.
Yeah, you can't suck, right? And so
you're either a legend or a loser, Stephen.
and you have to recognize it is a long-term play. I mean, nobody watched Gary Vaynerchuk first episode of Wine Library TV. Nobody watched episode 50, but everybody was freaking paying attention at episode 900 all the way through 1,000. But he committed himself to creating great content every day for 5.5 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's really rare.
I have a friend whose name is Melanie Gideon. And Melanie is a New York Times best-selling author of what I think most people refer to as chick lit. And, she's achieved something that a lot of people, almost everybody who ever took a creative writing class of any sort, sort of had a dream about being a best-selling author of fiction, right? And I remember asking her, Stephen, so how did you make this happen? You're living so many people's dream. And she said, I just didn't quit.
Amen.
So there really is something to that, right? And yeah, but you also have to you have to find the right platform where you can achieve some kind of escape velocity. I mean, on episode, well, we called it episode 1. It's the second episode of Legends and Losers. Our first guest was Dushka Zapata, and Dushka blogged for years and years and years, and nobody paid any attention. And she started responding to people's questions with her creative writing skills on Quora, and ba-boom, I think she's over 80 million views. And
Wow.
I don't know if she's the most successful writer on Quora, but hard to believe there'd be that many more that are more successful than her. And she's coming out with, I think it's book 3 now, and she's literally a phenomenon. And yet she wrote for over a decade before anybody ever paid attention. And I think in her case, it's clear that Quora created a platform that a standard WordPress blog, for whatever reason, wasn't able to give her an opportunity to build an audience the way Quora did. So there's this sort of interesting intersection of kind of content and medium that sort of have to be right.
Yeah, and James Patterson, one of the most successful authors of today, he worked as a creative director in an ad agency for 21 years. And I interviewed one of his friends, Linda Thaler, who went on to own her own agency with great success. But she worked with Jim for 20 plus years. And Jim's story is, every morning he woke up and wrote for 4 hours before he went to the agency. And every night he wrote before he went to bed. And, he did it for 21 years before his first novel was a success. Many of them sucked along the way, and he continued to perfect his craft. I think most people give up way too easy, in my opinion. And I know that sounds kind of bad and sort of harsh. The reality is that it takes time to get good at what it is that you do. And I think that today we sort of sensationalize this overnight success, and it's crap. There is no such thing. No.
Yeah. What's the one thing that we haven't talked about yet that we should, Stephen, before we land this ship?
I think it's an extension of kind of where we're just at, and that's mindset, in really understanding that the imposter syndrome is real, that every single person, no matter what they tell you, is afraid of something. And whether they're afraid of success or they're afraid of failure or to start this new or how's this going to impact whatever, that everybody has dealt with the imposter syndrome. So if you can just understand that that's natural, that being afraid is natural, and that your key to success is just to push past it and grit it out over years and years and years, you'll be successful. You'll ebb and flow along the way and pay attention to the street signs that you see. But if you get your mindset right and focus on delivering value to your audience consistently, eventually you'll be successful.
You too can be Adam Carolla.
Adam had to start somewhere.
Who's your who are your favorite podcasters today?
Well, I like Rick Edelman's show. I think The Truth About Money is excellent. I like Gary V, although it's not I don't listen to him necessarily on the podcast side because I like his video content. I think it's very good. Mm-hmm. I think what Tony Robbins is doing is quite good. Of course, I'm biased. I think that all of our clients at Predictive ROI are rock stars. And then, really getting super targeted. I like the Build a Better Agency podcast because it's really zeroed in on our list, on what we do.
I was just on that show. It was great. Yeah. All right. Well, Stephen, I can't thank you enough for your time today. You've been incredibly generous. I think your hairdo is fucking awesome.
We go to the same stylist. Yes.
Yes. And I got to tell you, I've become a huge fan of Onward Nation. The guests you bring to the table, your voice, your insight, it really has become a favorite of mine. So thank you for that.
Well, and thank you for spending time with our audience and being generous with your expertise. And I mean, that was an incredible interview that it blew me away, and it was just awesome. So thank you for doing that for us.
It's very, very kind of you to say. And if you'll ever have me back, I'd be happy to.
I would love to have you back.
All right, Stephen. Well, you let me know, and be legendary, my friend. Well, there he is, our friend Stephen Woessner. Thanks again, Stephen, for joining us. You're great. Folks, if you enjoyed this episode, you are absolutely going to love our episode with Brian Kramer, who's a social media, social business star and the author of H2H and Shareology. And we had a great discussion with him not that long ago. Would like to do a couple shout outs. I'd like to say hi to Sawyer Drew for being my bodyguard at NetSuite's Sweet World in Las Vegas, particularly when we were mobbed with thousands of people at the book signing. Wasn't quite thousands, but we had a great time, didn't we, Sawyer? I also want to say hi to our friend Christian Anschutz. He was a guest on one of the first Legends and Losers. He's an incredible guy. He's the founder of Project Relo, which does an amazing job of creating these leadership experiences that bring together veterans and business leaders. Check that out. And he recently sent a picture of him at Omaha Beach wearing Legends and Losers t-shirt next to the monument. And I just, I love he was there and took a picture, and B, hey, what a legendary place to wear your Legends and Losers t-shirt. You can see it on our Facebook page if you like. And I also want to say thank you to Ryan Alter. He was kind enough to send me a mind-blowing email on LinkedIn, sharing with me about why he's enjoying Legends and Losers, and we appreciate it. Please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube. Remember, this podcast is not free. It costs you 2 seconds to give us a legendary review. You can find us on facebook.com/groups/Legends and Losers, on the Twitter machine at Legends Losers, or you can email us blackhole@legendsandlosers.com. We would like to thank HarperCollins bestseller, Play Bigger, How Pirates, Dreamers, and Innovators Create and Dominate Markets. Also, our friends at Equity Directory for connecting startups to the talent and resources they need to build legendary businesses. Tim Rode and the whole crew at onelifefullylived.org, the nonprofit that's helping you dream, plan, and live your best life. Stephen Woessner's hit podcast, Onward Nation. Brian Behrens of the Behrens Group, BEHRENS Group.com. He's the legendary designer and branding genius behind our brand and logo. Our dear friends at Category Design Advisors, dominate your market category. One of the top podcasts in the world, our friends at Achieve Your Goals with Hal Elrod, and right now John Berghoff taking over for Hal while he's out. Habitat for Humanity, building new futures. In Marin County, legendary realtor Jurg Sperry, make your Kentfield Ross and San Rafael dreams happen. Millionaire Moncast, the great podcast from our friend Maddie A. And Brother James, whose t-shirt I'm wearing today, the motivational music master for your next event, and the brand new book from our friend Dushka Zapata. You can check out her episode called A Spectacular Catastrophe. Today's information is provided to you solely for informational purposes. This oddcast is the sole property of the Legends and Losers Oddcast Network, and we would love it if you shared the shit out of it. We want you to know this oddcast was produced in a studio that contains nuts. Just look around. Legends and Losers have been proven scientifically to make you better looking. We want to warn you that all rights are disturbed, ask you to teach entrepreneurship, and say, don't jog around a prison. We'd also like to remind you that 5 a.m. is the time of the day when Legendary starts or finishes. Introduce 2 people you love to 2 podcasts you love. Never forget, this oddcast really ties the room together. And we need to apologize to Nick Halstead, CEO of Cognitive Logic. Sorry, Nick, we ran out of time for you. That's it. Be legendary, my friends.